welcome. As I was saying, welcome to Krastorio. The same overhaul mod that is guilty of making space exploration playthroughs take over 500 hours, with a similar goal of creating intergalactic logistics, but with the end goal being the creation of the intergalactic transceiver.
There's more. No.
And since the early game is easily some of the less entertaining segments, I have installed a few mods to make the early game a little bit more interesting. So until space exploration finally has its 2.0 debut, I once again welcome you to this playthrough of Krastorio 2 Spaced Out Edition. Now with the intro finally concluded, let us begin. I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with how a Factorio playthrough usually begins. However,
That motherfucker's cheating!
I have decided to skip the early game grind so that I can get things moving faster and quickly get out of the early stages of the game, since as I said during the intro, the early game is not the most interesting. At least that's what I think. I also think it makes for a better viewing experience. And if you think me boosting past the early game is so bad, well, I hate to break it to you, but you're not gonna like this next part.
You what?
Because I have construction and logistic robots. So for the people that are listening and not slamming away at their keyboard telling me that, oh, that's not how you play Factorio, I'm pushing almost 600 hours of playtime as of the making of this video, and quite frankly, I'm sick of the early game. Anyway, moving on. I've got a basic power setup here. Most people do one offshore pump feeding 20 boilers, which then feeds 40 steam engines, but I don't need that much power right now, so we'll be expanding on that later. But with power now set up, it's time to start getting the drills, furnaces, and everything else we need put down to get resources pumping life into this barren land. So let's get to work.
Sons and daughters, hide the heart of who we are, making peace to build a future, strong, united, working till we fall. The air and water flowing hard, the land we call our home, push to keep the dark from coming, feel the weight of what we owe. This, the song of sons and daughters, hide the heart of who we are, making peace to build a future, strong, united, working till we fall. And we're all lift, and we're all adrift together, together. Till we're lifeless together, together.
So with the basic setup and a decent SPM of 52, mind you that's with the basic labs. If we want to get any more science at this point, we will need to swap over to the advanced labs, while more expensive, perform much better than the standard lab with a research speed of 5.25 instead of 3.5, and on top of that they drain 20% less from the tech cards. And while more science output is obviously great for the factory, there is the one massive downside of switching over to the advanced labs.
You were good, son, real good. Maybe even the best.
Now I would like everybody to take a moment to pay their respects and hold down the F key for the Caramel Dancing Labs and their contributions to the early game.
Don't act dumb.
While we were busy talking about the labs, they actually did their job and unlocked robots for us, and now we can start putting robots into production. So while the flying robot frame recipe from vanilla is arguably very simple, Krastorio 2 definitely changes it up a little bit. So instead of green circuits, you need electronic components, which require these materials here: plastic, silicone, and glass, with glass and silicone being unique mostly to Krastorio 2. I say mostly because I'm sure other mods incorporate these materials as well, but because I haven't touched any other mods as of recently, I would not know. So with the electrical engines recipe being unchanged from vanilla, we're going to bring over some iron and copper, turn them into gears and pipes, combine them with a copper plate, making us an engine, put the engine on a belt and have it tossed into the assemblers, making our electrical engines. The second part is making lubricant. So here I have it set up so I have a pump feeding directly into the chemical plants with the condition set that it will turn off once it reaches a certain threshold, with the output of the chemical plants feeding into another tank with another pump set with the control that if it reaches 2K, it cuts itself off. Fluid controls like this are really important because it allows you a cutoff point if you end up using more than what you're actually making, allowing you to have a little bit of a reserve, so that way when you fix the ratios, you don't have to wait for the system. You can go ahead and jumpstart it back up and let the system catch up on its own. So with the ingredients ready to go, it's now time to talk about the robots. For most, if not all of my playthroughs, I use the exotic industry robots. But in this playthrough, I have it set up so I'm using a rebalanced version of them, so make them more expensive, but at the same time making them much stronger. Now, instead of using normal logistic bots, I use what is called the heavy cargo bot. This robot, as the name suggests, carries quite the amount of cargo compared to the normal logistic bots. And since my factory is always super bot focused, it allows me to not worry about a main bus in the late game, focusing instead on moving mass quantities of items very quickly, allowing me to build stuff that I wouldn't normally be able to otherwise because of belts. Not to mention the fact that it's very cool to see all the bots flying around moving stuff around the factory. Now while these bots are great, I do not want to be making a ton of them, so I'm setting up a condition here that it prevents them from being put into the roboport, thus being put into the network when a certain amount of bots are available. And instead of doing the total number, I'm doing it so that it's the amount available, so that if the network gets super busy and I need more bots, it will put them into the network for me. That way I don't have to come back and do it manually, but also so it's not sitting there making a ton of bots or not making any bots at all when I want more bots to be made. But there's also the fact that I'm not making as many of them because later on, once we get into space tech, I'm going to be making these. When these bots are put into production, they will easily be the backbone of Novice's logistics. With robots done for now, I felt it was time.
Oh no!
Well, that's not good. Let's open up the map here and take a look and see. Yeah, I may have gotten a little carried away with the expanding. So now that big biters are here, I'm gonna have to start looking at building. With big biters now in play, most people would switch to making an actual barrier, but I'm not going to do that right now. Right now, I'm going to focus on building the perimeter using the buffed gun turrets from Krastorio 2, and worry about building a wall later once I've actually got all the science and stuff that I want going. For some of the other buffs, like with AP ammo, you have well over 150 physical damage, which is insane for the early game. You wouldn't ever have to worry about biters anytime soon. Then once you get into the late game, you've got uranium rounds doing physical and radioactive, then you have emersite rounds doing physical and laser. So in-game gun turrets are pretty damn strong, but while they may be super strong, you will require to have some form of logistics for them because you'll need to put the ammo in through an inserter, whereas with laser turrets and flamethrower turrets, you don't need to do that. Now with the base secured, it's time to put on your lab coats and it's time to get down to science.
No! I'm with the science team!
And first on the menu is utility science, with utility tech cards requiring blue circuits, low density structures, and rocket fuel. And with space age, that means they use the exact same ingredients as it takes to make a rocket, which means no more rocket control units and definitely no more satellites, making rockets cheaper and more affordable because they are such a crucial part of intergalactic logistics. And satellites are no longer needed thanks to the changes made to creating space tech. Now, one thing that hasn't changed is that LDS still requires quite a lot of investment, so we'll need to set up a nice sizable array of assemblers, otherwise we're going to be sitting here waiting forever to get the amount of LDS that we're going to need, not only for the utility science, but also for the rockets. Now, speaking of rockets, we're going to need a lot of rocket fuel, so I'm taking this small factory that has been creating a small stockpile for me and expand upon it. Now, unfortunately, we won't be able to enjoy the simplicity of the vanilla recipe, so instead we'll have to deal with what Krastorio 2 has decided to do with the recipe instead, which quite frankly is a lot more involved when you look at and compare the two different recipes. Now, obviously, one of the biggest changes is having to put down these atmospheric condensers to pull oxygen from the air and then pipe them out towards the fuel refineries, which then allow us to make rocket fuel. Now, with rocket fuel being made, we'll finish setting up the sushi belt with later iterations of the belt having controls put in to prevent items from being pulled when below or above a certain threshold. Since everything is coming together nicely now, we can have the bots drop some plastic in a requester chest here with a loader outputting a full belt. Speaking of requester chests and the like, we'll go ahead and set up some for the research servers here to go ahead and get ready to start making and sending the tech cards to the lab array. So with utility tech cards now doing their thing, it's now time to move to production tech cards, easily one of my least favorite to do in Krastorio. And for one very simple reason, this recipe sucks, requiring you to have uranium-238 red belts and productivity module 1s, with productivity module 1s being the crutch of this because it takes so much effort to make them, and for how long they take to craft, you have to make an entire section for them just to have a decent output. Now, thankfully, I still have a blueprint that I used back in 1.1 that still works here in 2.0, and instead of just plopping it down and forgetting about it, I'll actually explain how it works, because this is a good chance to show you how I use bots in my factories. Now, small disclaimer, and I'm sure that you've noticed at this point, this is much farther into the save than we've seen thus far, but that's because the way to showcase this the best is to show it when it's actually active and full and working constantly, rather than showcasing when I first built it. Now, some of you with keen eyes are going to notice something unique but equally strange going on with the inserters, and there's a very simple reason for that. In Krastorio 2, uranium processing outputs iron and stone at a small percentage. And while the output might not be very great, if I were to sit there and use a active provider chest, my storage chests would be filling up very quickly with the amount of stone and iron that are getting thrown out, especially considering how I've got these beaconed. So for the sake of consistency and having a bit of passive storage, no pun intended, I have it set up so that the 238 and the 235 and the stone and iron all have their own dedicated chests and are filtered out, so that way I don't have to sit there and deal with it, but also so the system can pull from it whenever necessary. And doing it this way is one of the many ways that I use bots in my factories, because trying to put all of this onto a belt system, as you can imagine, would probably be a lot less worth it than simply doing something like this, where you can just put it down, forget about it, and move on to the next thing, while also having the ability to keep it nice and compact, so that way I don't have to wrestle with spaghetti and try to navigate belts around to get what I need to go where and what needs to come in and blah 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 and all this other stuff. But also on top of all of that, it acts as another source of uranium-238 and 235 in the event that my main Kovarex line runs out for whatever reason. I have a backup just in case I need it. Outside of Kovarex, 238 actually has a lot of uses in Krastorio 2, none of which I'm going to get into right now because they're much further into the save and I will cover them then, but for the time being, this also helps kind of buffer and give me supply for 238, since I do use quite a lot of it for a lot of recipes later on. Now that we have everything to begin making rockets, we can start looking towards space, and more importantly, the creation of space tech cards. Now, earlier in the video, we talked about utility tech cards having the same cost as a rocket, and I didn't make the distinction earlier, but I'm going to make note now that I am not talking about the rocket silo being the same cost as that of utility science. I'm talking about the rockets that launch into space. Silos are still fairly expensive. That being said, as stated earlier in the video, 2 items removed from the rocket production process were rocket control units and satellites. Satellites are no longer needed because of how space tech is made now being crafted on the space platforms, and with rockets being such an important part of space logistics, it's important to be able to launch a ton of them fairly quickly. With the new recipe being what it is, that makes it possible to slam down a bunch of silos and send up 20 to 30 rockets if you really wanted to. So with that explanation out of the way, let's get a rocket up into the sky and start working on getting that space science going. Now, thankfully, I did a little bit of homework and I went ahead and set up some of the prerequisites of the stuff that I'm going to need. Solar panels for power in the sky, electric furnaces to start smelting stuff that I'll need, and then everything else that I would possibly need to help get space science going. There's always something magical about the first rocket you launch. The Steam All the Way achievement's kind of funny considering how important solar panels are in Space Age. So with the first rocket sent up now, and the first platform being built, welcome to the space platform Krastorio. At first, I had a lot of trouble with the space platform section. There were a lot of things that I didn't know because I didn't really look up space platforms. I wanted to do it mostly blind, but at the same time, I had already seen bits and pieces, so I kind of had a vague idea of what does what, and some stuff was super self-explanatory. Like the grinders obviously would grind down the materials into like usable raw materials. Solar panels obviously gave power, and the collectors obviously picked up asteroids. A lot of the trial and error was figuring out where to place all of them in an optimal way without it kind of being too much spaghetti, considering that obviously you can't use robots in space. The other half of it was figuring out how to place the assemblers and also how to feed stuff into them, because with how space platforms are, you kind of have to do a sushi belt. You don't really get a choice. The most optimal way to deal with the resources is to put it on a sushi belt. So there was also the other half, like, okay, if the sushi belt gets clogged, then how do I deal with that and keep stuff from getting clogged up? Because if it clogs up, well, guess what? You're not making anything. So at that point, it becomes... the entire system just gets deadlocked and you're not making anything. And obviously you can start seeing I'm making some decent progress here. It's not perfect, but it's enough for me to get the data cards going, so that way I can actually start making the research and start getting more unlocks, which will then make it easier for me to improve this later and make it more efficient once I actually have the research going and I can add stuff to it to make it better. So with the research finally going, and obviously you can see in the top right that I'm actually now working on logistics systems, so now I'll be able to make all of the chests that I haven't been able to make before outside of the ones that I started with, which in turn will allow me to actually create proper bot malls so I can have stuff being made without having to deal with all the craziness of setting up an assembly line for it. So with having hit Space Age, which was the goal of this video, I want to take a minute to not only thank you, but also talk about the process. As this is my first serious attempt at video editing, this whole video took me about a month to make, primarily because I'm too much of a perfectionist, since I kept finding small little things that I either didn't like, or I simply saw something that I wanted to improve on or could be improved, or I had this idea that would fit perfectly into a certain part of the video. And originally this video was meant to be like 30 minutes long, give or take, but the early game had so much fluff and crap that if I was a viewer, I would personally find boring and I would just skip to the more interesting parts, so I simply cut them out and condensed everything down. And I'm not the type to ask for a thumbs up or to hit the subscribe button or do any of that, so only do it if you actually enjoyed the video and you like the content. Outside of that, thank you for your time, and I hope you look forward to the next part where we will be exploring space.